Goofer, I forgot to hit live. I got very used to the old YouTube where if you hit start streaming, it starts streaming. So I've just been talking to myself for a while. Let me pop out the chat so I can see what you guys have to say while I'm also looking at my reference. There we go. So we are still house hunting. It's been since like March now, so it's been a while. We've certainly had to be persistent. There's just not, hey Tolly, good evening. There's just not necessarily a whole lot in our area right now. So now that I'm looking at my reference and kind of analyzing it, hey Dawn, good evening. I want to bring some of this cool yellow into the bottom of my tulip. So one of the reasons I am painting on a cellulose watercolor paper, other than, you know, affordability, is that they tend to dry pretty quick because it doesn't actually ever really soak into the paper, just kind of soak on the surface. So that actually makes painting quickly, so long as the humidity is not crazy, it makes painting quickly a little bit easier. But even though it's cheaper and often labeled as student grade and implied like it's sold for students, cellulose paper is actually a little bit trickier, I think, than cotton rag paper. So it takes some getting used to, it takes some practice, but once you get the hang of it, it gets a lot easier. So something I'm noticing, so I have here a little bit of it's a quin red, but it's Holbein cherry red, and I'm noticing that in the stem, not all the stems in our reference, but one of them, there's a bit of red, and I really enjoy bringing in a little bit of red into the stems before we paint the green. It just kind of adds this extra something. I'm also going to grab just a smidgen of yellow ochre, because we have like a creamy color in the tulip blossoms themselves. So I'm mixing in some of that quin red with the yellow ochre. It's going to give us kind of a peachy color. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of apply that all over as a base color. And tonight I'm painting using silver black velvet watercolor brushes, which I really like. They are a mix of natural hair, I think it's squirrel, and synthetic, so they can hold up to almost anything. And they kind of honestly have the did I paint that? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm sorry. I am painting the tulip that I've linked in the actually, let me adjust my screen in a minute so you guys can actually see the reference as part of this. And then let me resize it, and hopefully it'll show the tulip. Yes, it will. Ah, fantastic. Weather makes bad headache. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Headaches are definitely rough. I get migraines myself, and it makes it a challenge for sure. While this is still wet, in some areas, see, that's one of the challenges of painting on cellulose, is that it dries unevenly, so you'll get areas that are still wet and then some areas dry very quickly. But I want a little bit of wet into wet, so I'm going to try to catch it real quick. And this is just more of that kind of Holbein cherry red. But what I was looking for, the reason I selected this, is that it is a very cool red that reads as a pink as it gets lighter. And for the tulip we're painting, or the tulip I'm painting, that suits it just fine. blend that out a little bit, even though sometimes with cellulose, when you blend out like that, it'll lift up the paint, so you gotta be kind of careful with it. I really wish here in the US they'd stop marketing cellulose as a student grade paper, because it definitely has some unique quirks that, while I enjoy painting on it, I make watercolor comics, so I usually use I use Canson Montval for my comics, but it handles quite a bit better than this does. But it does take a lot of getting used to, and it bums me out to see people painting on student grade paper thinking that that's a good place to start, a good place to learn, that it's going to behave the way, you know, professional watercolor paper will for the most part. They are very different. So it kind of bums me out to see people beat themselves up over it, because it's going to do what it wants to do. All right, so I've grabbed some more yellow ochre, and while that's still wet, I'm probably going to make a mess. But I'm just going to try to float some of that in and try to capture some of that color shift. And right now, I'm mainly just referencing the blossom closest to the viewer towards the bottom. We'll see if we have a good drawing night or a bad drawing night. It's one of the challenges of doing watercolor streams is I live in Southeast Louisiana. So when it doesn't want to dry, it doesn't want to dry. All right, so I have a green gold, and I have kind of this green gold and blue color. So I'm going to start with the greenish gold, and I'm actually going to use a little bit of an actual green gold for that. So I have some Winsor & Newton. I think it's green, actually just called green gold. And what I'm looking for is kind of a warmish green that's not too dark. Can I explain what spot color is? Is cellulose watercolor paper? Tali, would you mind linking the video that references that so I know exactly what instance you're talking about? Spot color is a pretty simple technique. You're just selecting one color and using that as kind of like your mid-tone. So give me a minute and I can link an illustration that utilizes it. Cellulose watercolor paper can be a good choice for that, depending on what you're using as your spot color. So I think in the tutorial, you might be talking about, I'm using a water-based Pentel brush pen as my spot color. So I wanted something that would be that would absorb the color. I don't know why. I was so focused on watercolor, and then when you asked me that, I had to switch tracks, and my poor ADHD brain sometimes struggles with that. So I'm trying, but I appreciate the patience. So it kind of depends on what you're using. So if you're using like a Copic marker, or if you're using watercolor, or if you're using dye-based color, or if you're doing it digitally, there are a lot of different ways that you can do spot color. So it kind of depends on what materials you want to use and what you want from your spot color. That's awesome. I was trying to dual record this so I could edit it into a tutorial later, and it decided to shut itself down. Don't know where I lost it, but hopefully I didn't lose too much. And you can see the watercolor, or the color just pooling on the paper. It's just, so the thing about cellulose is it just sits on the surface of the paper. It doesn't soak in like it would on a cotton rag watercolor paper. Oh yeah, so when I used that paper, it was because I knew it would kind of soak up and hold on to the ink from the Pentel brush pen. But even if you're using a very absorbent paper for that, it can still sometimes leach up. So what you want to do is you want to use a blotter sheet of paper just to kind of protect it, because if you rest your hand on it, the oils, the sweat from your hand will reactivate it, and then you'll end up smudging the ink all over the place. So you use, you could wear a glove or you use a blotter sheet of paper so that you can rest your hand on it. Oh, thank you so much, Dawn. I'm glad you enjoyed that tutorial. That one, whoo, that was a lot of work, that one. So I mixed in some more yellow ochre and a little bit of, I think it's burnt umber, but a darker warm brown. Just to hopefully add some shadow into the cream areas here. So another thing about inexpensive cellulose papers is sometimes it will like scrub the layer off of it. So you do want to be careful with that. And that I've noticed that's particularly true on humid nights where it's not really drying fast enough. I'm also going to grab a little bit of a cool blue, and I really mean even less than that would be good, but I'm going to use this to mix up a really bright, fresh green. Just kind of layer that in there. And then I'm going to grab some more of kind of my cherry red, my quin red, and start working on developing more of the color in the tulip itself. So the lovely thing about painting from reference is you can decide how true to reference you want to be. You can merge several images together to get more of what you're really looking for. You don't have to stay super true to what the photo shows. It's one of the things I really love about art and illustration is you can kind of make an idealized version of it. And actually, since I have multiple brushes here, why not? I can do a little bit of dual wielding. So with a cotton rag paper, it would kind of grab onto this color and you would see like this really nice color bloom. But on a cellulose paper like this one, it kind of puddles and you kind of have to work it in there. I want to make sure I leave some of the spine on this petal here, that lighter color, because that's going to help us create that form. I am painting on inexpensive Blick Studio sketchbook watercolor paper. So this is their cellulose paper. It doesn't take watercolor as well as, say, Canson Montval or more expensive cellulose papers, but it's kind of a good watercolor sketchbook paper. It takes alcohol marker well, it takes watercolor decently well, it takes watercolor marker pretty well. So it's kind of a nice all-rounder. And when I was doing these flower sketches, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do this as watercolor marker tutorials or Copic marker tutorials or watercolor tutorials. So I kind of left myself some wiggle room for that. Now, one of the things about painting on cheaper papers is it's often better to just kind of work it less. So fewer layers, not as much blending, just kind of leave it less painted because cheaper papers are more prone to turning to mud, to the colors just kind of all lifting up if you try to layer them, to things kind of just bleeding into each other, and just like weird paper quirks. So for something like this, it's better to leave it lighter, and that way it looks fresher. It doesn't look as over rendered. Because this kind of paper just can't take the amount of work that other kind of papers necessarily can. And that's not like, yeah, thank you. Yeah, for in this kind of instance, you might want to work the inks a little bit more so that way you get that definition, that way you get that contrast, and that way you don't have to add as much detail or work the watercolors as much because you've already done a lot of that work. People understand what you're rendering. I am so impressed Joseph could make it, because I know he is in the kitchen cooking a super tasty cauliflower soup right now. But I guess it does need to cook, so. Another thing about cellulose paper is that color, especially say watercolor, is not, it dries not nearly as bright as it would on a cellulose paper. They just don't hold the colors quite as well. So I've got my green gold again. I'm going to go back into my tulip stem and try to layer it. We'll see how successful we are. And then go back into the leaves as well. See, I want to be careful because I don't want it to bleed into the pink of the tulip. We'll see how successful I am. And it's kind of just sitting on the surface of the paper. So I may have to turn the fan on in here just to get the air moving, just to get the colors to settle down. What? Interesting. I have tried watercolor ground, and I personally don't, I think it makes my watercolors look like mush when I use it. But it might just be that I've used too much of it. I have both the core watercolor ground, I think Kabocha sent me that, and the Daniel Smith, like a tub of the Daniel Smith watercolor ground. So to my knowledge, that's not necessarily so much for prepping a paper. It's for putting it on like wood or some other object that generally would not be particularly receptive to watercolor. What do you do to make your own watercolor ground? So I'm going to grab a little bit of our cooler blue. And come in up here and try to streak some in. And some on the background leaf as well. And adding some blue is going to actually help push that more towards the background. And then I'm literally really just waiting for paint to dry before I can make a whole lot more progress. I did add lots of water to alizarin crimson, so we've got a cooler, slightly darker red, not as pink as the Quinn red. And I'm gonna dab some of that in down here. See, I'm impatient and I don't like waiting for like one area to dry while while I'm painting. So I'll try to work on adjacent areas and sneak some work in there while I can. So that is very wet. I don't know if you guys can tell, but it's all sitting on the surface of the paper. So I'm going to turn on the fan. I know some people would actually recommend using a hair dryer on this. That's kind of a matter of your own taste, but what I've really noticed when it's just sitting on the surface is that if I use a hair dryer on it, it has a tendency to just push the paint into other areas. So for me, that's not necessarily the best solution. So I'm going to turn on the fan. That's still going to push air around, but by getting the air circulating in here, at least some of the water can evaporate. And when you're applying either homemade or purchased watercolor ground to your paper, I guess what I'm struggling to understand, is it to like watercolor papers to make them more receptive, or is it to other papers and it's really just the structure, so like Bristol, because it provides support? Because I mean, I know some of it is being spoiled for choice, but that would to me change the working properties of the paper in a way that like Elmer's glue is reactivated with water. So my concern would be if I put a lot of water onto my paper, it's going to basically become gluey again. Oh, what other materials can be used for spot color? Well, you can do it digitally if you want to. Hey, Bugsy, good evening. You could use color, like crayons. You could use color pencils. Basically, anything that has color can be used for spot color. It's really kind of up to you. You could use watercolor. You could use watercolor dye inks. You can use alcohol markers like Copic markers. You can use water-based markers like Crayola markers if you want to. It's kind of whatever medium you like on whatever paper you like using that has the color that you're looking for. I would not necessarily call cauliflower soup a cultural food, but I would also not necessarily call casseroles a cultural food, and I think a lot of people associate that with American culture, unfortunately. All right, hopefully that doesn't just push paint in places where I don't want it to be. There we go. So hopefully that'll help with the dry times. And I think tonight I'm only going to do one flower and just kind of try to work my way through. See, my experience with Elmer's glue in the US, the white school glue, is that any water turns it back into sticky glue mask. So it might be like a different formulation, or maybe adding the acrylic, because the acrylic has a polymer in it. Maybe that helps. I think this just boils down to preferences in watercolor paper. So you guys can kind of see as it's drying, the colors are lighter than when they went down. And that's just like nature of the beast kind of thing with watercolor, with inexpensive cellulose papers, is that it's not going to dry quite as vibrant. Does adding a watercolor ground help it dry a little bit more like true to the colors you originally put down? Okay, so now I'm adding, it's a stronger mix of that cool, almost phthalo-like blue. You can see where it's kind of pooling, where it's still wet. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm kind of trying to cap in the leaf itself. Then I need to decide if I want to add some of that blue on the other side, which would cool it down and kind of help it recess into the background. And then this is still wet, but I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of shadow over there. And it's also not a rainy night. It's only like, what, 7% humidity in Louisiana tonight. So it's actually not really a bad night for painting. Add some striations up here as well. And probably as this dries, I'll want to go in and add some more yellow. It kind of depends. That's something I really like, though, is that there's so much variety in how people handle watercolor. And really, in the end, in my opinion, I'm not the watercolor society, but in the end, if you're happy with how it looks, then it's a successful piece. Oh, okay, I understand now. Yeah, I'm not super fond of Payson or Paycon paper either. They sell that at Walmart and like Dollar Tree, so inexpensive stores. And I mean, I've bought it and reviewed it and struggled with it. I'm thinking of the 7% chance of rain. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. It's not raining, I'll give you that. No, it's never. Well, if we're in a drought, it might be. 60%, inside is 45. Yeah, and we're running a dehumidifier and the air conditioner, so doing everything we can to get some of that humidity out of the air. So I've mixed some naphthalide maroon in with my alizarin crimson and quin red, just so that I can start getting a darker color. And I'm also using a smaller brush, and I'm trying to do kind of a feathered effect, paying a lot of attention to kind of the striations in the petals in the reference. So that's one of the reasons I like drawing and painting from reference. Sometimes I go off script, but it helps me, as someone who has such a cartoony art style, it helps me create something that's a little more believable. Hey, Hema. I said hi to you earlier, but I was a dum-dum and I hadn't even hit go live because I'd forgotten that with YouTube, you not only have to hit start streaming on OBS, you have to hit go live. That is a hot one, especially this earlier in the year. Wow, this early, right? I said this early, not this earlier in the year. Oh, I'm sorry you're having trouble understanding it. If you can just go ahead and ask me your questions, hopefully I can explain it. But honestly, with so much with art, sometimes the only way to really understand it is to give it a try and see what you like. I know, I draw a lot of flowers. I really want to start doing more food illustrations. So that's something I need to, like, you know, once I finish painting these 1 billion flowers, because I have 3 sheets like this in here, I need to start doing some food illustration. So more naphthalene maroon and a little bit of diox purple, just a smidge, a small scoosh. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like when it's all done. Usually I don't have them all crammed on the same piece of paper. And I just blended that out with a little bit of a little bit of clean water. I mean, it is cold water. You don't want to paint with hot water, but. Oh yeah, I see what you mean. All right, so this needs a bit more of a chance to dry, and then I want to go over it again, I think, with the cherry red and try to develop some of that mid red that we've got sometimes going on. I would listen to flowers. And grabbing a slightly darker cool blue. And I really love how cool phthalos look layered over yellows and green golds, because it's just such a really fresh kind of green color. If I make funny faces, I'm sorry. That's me trying. I always make kind of funny faces when I'm drawing and painting. If I'm drawing characters, usually I'm making the same expression my characters are making. Alright, that's looking pretty good. Oh, I love it. All about the bottom left? No, bottom left. I think that's a hyacinth. Oh, lots of other artists have used spot color in their illustrations. It's a pretty common technique for being cheap. Let me grab some examples for you to hopefully get you inspired. I'll turn off the virtual desktop for a minute. Not Google Drive, y'all. Oh, goodness. Oh, it's sad that my zine is the one, or my thingy is the one that comes up first. Okay, so here's a pretty good example. I'll link it for you. Give me a second. Yes, yeah, my cookbook is spot color. Yup. Oh, it will not let me post it. That's annoying. Seriously? Sorry. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Have too many tabs always. So here's an example with a Vampirella cover, and not only is it spot color, but it's spot color used to draw the reader's attention to her clothing and to her lips specifically. In this other example, I'm going to use, oh, there's some really good ones. Okay, so in this one, they're using spot color the way I like to use spot color, where it is like the third color on the page. So you have white, you have black, and then you have your spot color. And that can be used to draw interest. It can also be used as a money saving measure when printing, because traditionally with printing, you would have different plates for the different colors, and spot color means you need fewer plates. Here is another example where they're using green as the spot color, so you can use it both as a shading color, or you can use it to create focus, like in that middle panel where the face is left white. That creates a strong contrast between the black and the white, because the eyes are drawn to the area of strongest contrast. I think this is actually from, it looks like, no, it's not from Hanadoki Kira. It's from Elements. But in this one, they're using this like really pretty blue tone with a slightly darker blue. So I'm assuming the lighter blue is a half tone, and a half tone is basically like little bitty dots, and it's like dots of that color and then areas left white or unprinted, and together your eyes make a pastel or a lighter version of the color with it. So what I think they're doing is a half tone and then the full color to create spot color. But you can see there's a lot of different ways to use spot color to tell your story and to kind of convey what's going on. So in this other instance, spot color is being used to create this strong visual contrast. It kind of frames the figure, and it also really brings attention to the fact that this character is wearing a cape. So you can use that as a way of like really directing the eye and really grabbing the viewer's attention. Sorry, I'm also looking for more examples, because there's a lot of different ways it can be done. I really encourage you to just kind of play around with it. You could try, oh, hey, there's one of mine. Did I link? No, I didn't link a lot of it, which is kind of a bummer. So in this instance, that one's mine. I'm using the spot color for clothing, so that helps draw attention to the characters, and I'm also using it with the food to kind of help guide the eye. And the reason I was using a Pentel brush pen on watercolor paper is because I wanted this kind of crunchy dry brush effect of areas like you can see on the crabs down at the bottom. I'll go ahead and turn on the virtual desktop since it's my art and I don't have to get somebody else's permission for that. But that's why I wasn't showing them on stream, is because I don't necessarily have their permission to use those examples. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but some people don't necessarily want their art being used in somebody else's stream, and I respect that. I would not want to rebroadcast it, so that's why I linked it in the chat. But for mine, it's mine. So you see those areas in Naomi's hair where it's like little white flecks? That would be dry brush. That's where the brush pin kind of skipped over the paper. I wanted that because it has this really crunchy, organic feel that feels like a real person drew this. And I find that sometimes, in my opinion, digital art can look too slick. And in my opinion, I don't like using digital art to recreate traditional techniques. In general, I would rather just do the traditional techniques. The only reason I would do something that I could do digitally, something I would do traditionally using digital techniques, is for money or for time. Or space, if I don't have the space to do that. So yeah, those are some examples of spot color. Hopefully that answered your questions. But I invite you to just go ahead and dive in. What I would do is, if I were you, is I would draw like the same image 5 times and try applying the spot color in different areas, or handling the spot color differently, maybe using it for shadows in one image, maybe only using it for one article of clothing for another image, maybe using it in the backgrounds when I want to signify something specific. So just to see how to handle it. And let me turn off the fan because the watercolor is mostly dry now. But like, that's always my best comic advice and my best drawing advice and my best any art advice, is just try doing things over and over and over again using kind of the same or a very similar base image to see if you like the technique and to see if you can kind of figure out your feet with that technique. Because the more you practice doing something, the more you do something, the better you're going to get, the more you're going to understand it, and the more you're going to develop your own style with it. So I'm grabbing some more of that Quin red, that cherry red, because my color dried a little bit light, and while this is kind of a pink tulip, I do want to express some color vibrancy. So usually with an inexpensive paper like this, you'll want to be kind of careful about how much glazing you do, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm applying my like mid-tone color kind of over my darker colors. If it starts lifting, picking up, turning to mud, then I'll just repaint my darker colors on top of it. And then I used a brush with some not really clean anymore water to kind of blend that out into the stem. So hopefully that spot color walkthrough gave you some ideas, helped answer some of your questions. But also, some of my best advice when it comes to art stuff is, if you've already watched the tutorial, then just jump in and try it, because the worst you're going to do is you're going to waste a little bit of paper learning how to do something, which isn't really a waste. You'll just have figured out some ways you don't like to do it. Like, to me, you can't ever really get good at art if you don't put yourself out there and try. I mean, I have filled up so many sketchbooks with really bad studies, really bad art, just stuff that didn't really work. I still make things that don't really work, but that's how you improve. You know, you see where you're making the mistakes, you try to analyze that as best as you can, you get feedback from people you trust, maybe sometimes the real learning comes from like learning how to fix it and how to problem solve and how to make it into something you actually really do like. I mean, the only reason I kind of know how to maneuver inexpensive cellulose paper is I've made a lot of mistakes. I've painted a lot of things that turned to mud. I painted a lot of things that I was like, oh, I hate this, you know? Okay, so while that's drying, I'm actually going to use some masking tape, and hopefully I won't tear up the other drawings. But I cannot draw or paint a straight line to save my life. So I'm going to use this to help me paint a straight line. I think the worst part about struggling with depression and anxiety is that it made me kind of afraid to make mistakes. And when you're making mistakes in art, sometimes that's how you are able to learn the most. So I'm going to paint around where this rose bud is. I have no idea if I'm going to use the same background for any of these others. I haven't thought that far. These are watercolor sketches. These are watercolor studies for me, so I'm not super concerned about being perfect. In the reference, you guys can see, let me make sure I turned on the, yeah, okay. In the reference, you guys can see that there's like a brown-black background for that. I actually want to go with blue, I think. So I am going to grab some indigo. Not too much. Water it down a little bit. And this is wet, so I can't rest my hand there. So I'm just going to have to be careful. And I'm not trying to soak it or saturate it because I don't want it going under that tape. And masking tape, especially inexpensive washi tape, does not do a great job of keeping water out. And most of what I'm painting with, these are rounds. They look round, that's how you know they're rounds. Sometimes watercolor brushes have funny names. Fortunately, rounds are pretty straightforward, flats are pretty straightforward. Filberts are the ones that are gonna throw you. They're kind of shaped like a oval, like a flat oval. Actually, the indigo looks pretty good with the tulip. Oh man, I need to start painting food more, and one of the reasons I don't is it makes me really hungry. But I would love to get paid to draw food, and I don't have hardly any in my portfolio. And you can't get hired for something you don't draw. Well, there are people who have, but it's unreasonable to expect that you would get hired for something you don't ever draw. Of course, I'd love to get paid to paint and draw flowers as well, so you know. But I have plenty of that. I don't really need 60 more examples of that. Oh man, that soup is smelling so good. I had a breakfast bar before I started streaming. That's the real reason I'm only doing one flower tonight. Actually, no, because the dry times would just, this would end up turning into like a 4-hour tour. So you guys just saw me dab off some of that excess water onto my paper towel. I'm just trying to do some water control so I don't have a whole lot of pooling. Perfectionism plus anxiety plus boy, yeah, that is a really killer team. It basically keeps you from making anything. And I feel that. Or you got limited time, so it's like this is where I fell into, okay? So for me, because I'm waiting for this to dry anyway, for me, my ADHD, I only realized this after I tried the Adderall, and even though that didn't work, it helped me realize what was going on. For me, my ADHD currently manifests the worst as just extreme exhaustion all the time. Like my brain is understimulated, so I think it's time to go to sleep. So I have limited energy on certain days. And on those, when it's like that, you're like, well, I only feel this good. I want to make some art. I'm going to do the thing that always works. And and then you end up drawing the same thing over and 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 over again. And for me, it was even getting to the point where Kara wasn't even really emoting anymore, which is really, I feel like, indicative of kind of like what I was going through. I wasn't doing it on purpose, and it makes me sad that I have a body of work like that, but that's, indicative of what I was going through. Yeah, being a student, you have limited time, so you're going to draw the thing that gets you the most bang for your buck, that makes you feel good, like, hey, I did a thing, I like how it turned out. So you're going to end up doing the same things over and over and over and over again, which you get real good at doing that one thing, but people get bored of seeing it. I'm speaking from my own life here. I'm not making any judgment calls against anyone but myself. People get kind of bored of seeing it. You get kind of bored of seeing it, but you haven't yet realized like what's going on. And I'm bringing that up because I feel like that's something people don't really talk about a whole lot. So, if me talking about it can help someone else recognize that in themselves and get whatever help they need. Yeah, that's me with Kara just over and over again. She's like my comfort character, which it makes me happy, but it's not furthering my career. It's not gaining me new viewers. It's not gaining me new fans. It's just because I'm already struggling with these mental health issues, and I just don't have the extra energy for that. So, that's why I'm not a fan of when people are like, just practice drawing and you'll naturally get better at it. It's like, before any of y'all knew me, I was drawing several different comics that I never shared online. And that's like the majority of what I was drawing. And I didn't try doing still lifes, and I didn't try drawing from reference, and I didn't really do anything out of my comfort zone that wasn't for those comics. And I never got better. And I was drawing every day for several hours a day, but because I was only drawing very specific things, I wasn't improving. No, I get that, Bugsy. That was where I was at too. And there isn't anything wrong with doing that if your goal is making yourself happy, then it's a hobby. It's self-soothing. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not like casting shade, but I'm saying for me, I was stagnating. So in the end, it kind of depends on what you're looking for from your art. What do you want your art to do for you? And me doing that isn't and wasn't, I think, doing what I want my art to do for me. And I would have even been better served doing doing new comic pages. Okay, so I'm using that darker phthalo blue mix to add a little bit of shadow to this leaf that's behind the tulip, and also paint in some striations using a fairly small brush. You always want to work with the largest brush you're comfortable with using for what you're painting, because that's going to help keep things from getting too scrubby. I'm going to go in down here as well and do the same. So I'm currently reading the manga Blue Period, which if you enjoy art, whether it's fine art or comic art, you don't even have to like manga, but if you're interested in art, I highly recommend it. It's this high school boy's journey into becoming an artist, and it shows how he got serious. And they spend a lot of time talking about different art techniques and different practices. And honestly, I'm kind of tempted to like try making a boot camp regimen out of it and see if that doesn't help. Boy, yes, Dawn, you are so right about that. Sometimes making YouTube videos can exhaust and cause burnout to depression because there are days when I feel dragging. Yes. So what I mean by scrubby is the colors look kind of muddy. You can see instead of like large solid fills, you have like tiny fills that look like, you know, I'd have to do it to really show you guys. And there are some artists who make beautiful art and they are able to use small brushes to fill large areas, but generally, based on, if you're asking me, I would not recommend it. I mean, there are artists who can paint with ketchup and it works for them. Wouldn't recommend. Still trying to work on how I draw anatomy when I'm not drawing that particular fictional character. Oh boy, yeah. That's a mood right there. It's like you've got it figured. That was me in high school with my comics too. I could do anatomy for them and it was passable. But if it was a new character, if I was drawing fan art, if it was from anything from reference, it wouldn't turn out because I had only figured out how to draw anatomy for my comic characters. Okay, so I wanted this to be a little greener because it's very warm. So I put a layer, we'll see how well that works, of the cool yellow and phthalo blue. And I don't want to overwork it. Pikachu would paint with mustard. Yeah, the same thing does happen with marker. So it's a lot like that. Or honey, maybe. Paint with honey. So, yeah, for sure. Doing YouTube stuff can cause burnout. I mean, because you think about it, you are creating content, right? And then, even when you're done with it, you still got to maybe voice over it, or you still have to edit it, and then you got to upload it, and then you got to do the descriptions, and then you got to promote it, and it's a lot. So I mixed some dioxine purple, which is a cool dark purple, in with our mess of red. And at this point with this, I need to work on kind of wrapping it up because I can tell from how the pigments are now just kind of sloughing off that this is not going to take any more work, really. I could maybe go in with some white gouache later on, but this is not going to take many more layers. And you can only learn when a paper's had enough by going too far and ruining many things. So that's a case for, reaching for the stars and maybe hitting a satellite somewhere. Oh, ketchup's his favorite. I would have thought he'd have been a sweets kind of Pika. I don't know why. I believe you, though. You are the resident Pikachu expert. Yeah, good. Good timing. And see, okay, so by applying that additional layer of that yellow green on top of this, because this is a paper that can't really take a lot of water and a lot of reworking, it actually kind of melted those prior layers in a way that you wouldn't necessarily get with a cotton rag paper, because those pigments would soak into the fibers with a good cotton rag paper, unless it's a hot press. Then even a good hot press doesn't take a lot of layers. But So with cellulose, generally you really want to keep fat over lean in mind. You want to do your really light, weak washes, your really thin glazes early on, and only start applying your details after that. You don't want to do too many layers of light glazes or toning glazes on top of those thicker mixes that are more saturated and have more pigment in them. Hey Kelly, long time no see. Well, YouTube's kind of weird too because you have to be extroverted, but you get no feedback. You're just extroverted to a camera. I mean, streams are great because you do get feedback and you have people to talk to. But when you're just recording a video, you can't see anyone's facial expressions. You don't know if something you've explained, if that makes sense, or if you explained it in a confusing way. And then depending on the people watching your video, they might just turn it off rather than asking in the comments for clarification or asking, messaging you and asking you to explain or do another tutorial on it. It is very challenging. And then if I know you work full time, when you're working a day job or you're working, that's getting most of the energy as it should. And then you're coming home and you're trying to give YouTube what you can. It's just very challenging. And, as YouTube grows and more people are making their full-time living off of YouTube, it just gets more competitive and more challenging and frustrating sometimes. Thank you, Dawn. I don't know if I could avoid my style. I tend to draw everything very round and cutesy, But I like that, I like that. I think it does look like something that I did. And honestly, you can develop that the more you draw from reference too, because it's all about how your brain is interpreting things and how you think about things and the what you value and what you're trying to communicate. So even if you're just drawing from reference, that's all about figuring out things that you like and that you want others to see. Because a lot of art is about communication, right? We're using this visual medium to try and show someone else something we see or we imagine or how we feel about something or what we're thinking about something. So this is maybe a little dumb, I don't know, but I love drawing and painting flowers because I'm not very good at growing them myself. I've always been interested in botany. I've always been interested in plants. But I just don't have much of a knack for it. And I come from a family of people with very green thumbs. Everyone but me is great at growing things, and I'm not. And I've also noticed that a lot of people about my age, and I'm 35, they don't really know a lot about plants unless that's their field of study. Like, we've lost a lot of our connection with nature and with plants and knowing these creatures, these organisms that share our planet with us. And for me, I enjoy drawing and painting plants because, well, it started the drawing and painting plants kind of started as a thing for Kara. I wanted to depict the world the way Kara saw it in a way that felt more realistic. But I also draw Kara experiencing and seeing those things because I want people to appreciate them in a different way. And to me, by changing the perspective, changing the view, and changing the scale can sometimes inspire people to see things from a different light. So what I wanted to communicate with drawing plants is this love of nature and this love of the non-sentient organisms that share our world with us, and this kind of like respect for these life forms, even though I'm not capable of necessarily nurturing them and having like this beautiful flower bed or this beautiful garden. also, Kelly, it's so cool that you are making art and selling art. That must feel very rewarding to be selling something that you work so hard on and to have other people appreciating the things that you think are beautiful.
Didn't realize you could hear yourself in here.
A little bit. It's a little weird.
Yeah. Dinner's ready.
Okay, I'm almost done. I mean, I'm going to turn on the fan and give it a chance to dry. Doing YouTube videos is great and taught me a lot. I'm using my channel to chronicle my art journey. That's really cool. So really not into making money aspect. I get you. I'm happy for those that are monetized. I get that too. Me and my relationship with YouTube is a little weird. Because I really enjoy teaching. So, I mean, I've been doing art education stuff like way before YouTube. I had the Natto Soup Studio blog that I did for a long time until I just got like totally burnt out and mad at doing it because I kept catching people lifting entire chunks of things I'd written and posting it on their sites without crediting me, and I was just like done with that. It gives validity to my life. Hey Tanner, good evening. In a way that I often feel like online my life doesn't have any validity. That sounds rough, I know. But sometimes I really feel like I don't contribute anything to the world and that if I just disappeared, it wouldn't matter, which I struggle with depression. I'll just be honest with you guys up there. And I think this is not an uncommon fight. I think that's a reason a lot of us do make art and share art. It is our little way of leaving a thumbprint on the world. And you can leave a mark on the world by being a terrible person. You can leave your mark on the world by being a selfish person. I wanted to leave my mark on the world by sharing what I knew with other people and making the education that I'd paid a lot of money for free for other people so they didn't have to sacrifice all that. And I had also hoped that I could earn my place in comics by doing that. And it didn't pan out, and I struggled with those thoughts and those feelings and a lot of resentment for a really long time. So, my relationship to doing these sort of things is often very fraught and very depressing, and I have to really try not to think all that much about numbers and all that much about money. I mean, my channel is monetized, but I'm making like $50 a month off of it from YouTube. That doesn't cover the materials, So it's a expensive hobby. So I get you where the monetization is not necessarily like the reason for doing it. Hema said, I love seeing environments in like animation or comics or games with plants that are huge as heck. Yes, Ragnarok Online had several maps that had these giant flowers that you could hang out in that I loved. And Dawn said, don't stress, girl. I'm not into growing things either. And everyone in my family loved planting, even my husband. Yes, a fellow not green thumb. And Kelly said, I'm drawing a girl that is walking to school. Oh, that's nice. Yes, the Deku tree is very cool. Barbie Fairytopia, where she lives in a peony. That sounds like my dream. Balloonia in Pokemon Sword and Shield, full of giant glowy mushrooms. Yes, that sounds amazing. Oh my goodness, thank you, Kelly. Kelly said, yes, right, it is. Thank you so much. I love your art so much. I like flowers. I love flowers too. Dawn said, I have terrible pollen allergies, so plants are not a part of my home. I get that. My cat will eat them and kill them, even if he shouldn't. We cause blight, so plants aren't much of a part of our home either. Joseph is right. I kill all of the plants that I have bought. And Tanner said, here, I hope I can leave my mark with my story someday. Yeah, that's the kind of legacy I'd like to leave in the world. It would matter if you're not here. All of YouTubers I follow, well, thank you so much, Dawn. That really means a lot to me. Look, to be real, I was really struggling before I went back on medication. I was exhausted all the time. I was depressed. I was extremely cranky because I was so tired. And I recently went back on Ritalin after 20 years of not. And I feel a lot better. It's so much easier for me to be the person I thought had died, because I had this really bad depression spell in 2015, and I thought that Becca was just dead and I was just gonna have to live without her, and it was sad, but I didn't know how to fix it, and I had no idea that that was from being ADHD, because I've been ADHD my whole life, and that is not one of the things people talk. I mean, you do, depression is a comorbidity, but I didn't realize the soul crushing exhaustion was one of them too. It makes sense though, because it's a disorder that comes from your brain can't accept like serotonin, and it doesn't necessarily accept dopamine. So the things that make you feel good, your brain is having trouble producing and accepting them. And it's also like, if you look at scans of people who have ADHD, if you look at their brain scans, our brain activity is not necessarily as bright as people who don't, which I think means our brains are not able to generate the stimulation we might need on our own. So it makes sense, but no doctor had ever even mentioned that to me. So I was like really killing myself trying to generate this energy that I used to have, but I didn't have anymore, and I really felt the lack of it. And now I don't have to fake it. I can just, be that, and it's so much easier. I was so worn out, and it was really making me burn out all the time, because that's the person people wanted. Oh, that worked out and it didn't tear up my paper. I'm so used to it normally tearing up my paper, and it doesn't look bad. Oh, thank you, Kelly. Kelly said, Becca, you helped me draw stuff that I didn't even know how, so I can become a pro by art because of you, Becca. Thank you. But you guys know what I mean. I definitely appreciate the generous and kind words, but you guys know what I mean. Like, you get into your own head and you start really doubting yourself, and sometimes that's a hard one to shake. So this is not fully dry, still have some wet areas. I would recommend you let it dry, but dinner is ready and I am hungry. So I'm gonna go ahead and use some white gouache. This is inexpensive white gouache. It's Utrecht's designer gouache, to add some white highlights. Yeah, that's my goal, is to help make art. I think anyone can learn, or almost anyone. I mean, there are probably some disabilities where maybe drawing is not the best form of art, maybe music or maybe sculpture is the best form of art for you, but in general, I feel like anyone can learn how to draw. I cannot promise that I can teach you how to be the best, because I don't know how to be the best, but I think anyone can learn how to draw, and I think drawing and being able to communicate visually is a wonderful skill that is really kind of neglected in schools. They teach us how to write, but they don't even teach us how to do effective stick figures that would be useful in communicating things with people who maybe don't speak English, or our native tongue, I should say. We have so many talented bilingual people in here. I'm so impressed. So I'm just using this to add in some highlights, to try to add in some contrast to help clean up some areas. It's pretty optional. You can also, if you inked your sketch, you can decide to re-ink it if you want, and that's going to adjust the contrast a little bit. We can talk about that. I have mentioned it in some videos, so I kind of botched that line. So what I'm going to do, and sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm going to use some clean water, a large brush, and I'm just going to kind of feather it out a little so it's not as noticeable. That's what I mean by, like, you got to make mistakes so that you can learn how to fix your mistakes. I'm so glad I met you too, Hema. I'm so proud of you, and our friendship has been a joy in my life. And I know this panini has made it very difficult for people to for some folks it's not so bad. Some people have blossomed in this, and I'm so impressed, but that ain't us, some of us. But it has made it hard for some of us to do the things and pursue the things and chase the dreams we wanted to chase. So I'm just honestly so impressed by the people who are just kind of keeping on right now, because I know these are hard times. Okay, give me a sec. So Dawn said, be blessed. You have a good night. You too. And it smells super good, so I am sure I will enjoy the cauliflower soup. But thank you, and I'm so glad you hung out this evening. And Kelly said, I used to speak Spanish, but I learned English, so that's how I know a lot now. That I hope you will continue speaking Spanish as well, because I think being bilingual is such a wonderful skill. I'm envious. They started teaching us French when we were in 4th grade, but you know, that doesn't really stick if you never have anywhere other than class to use it. So don't lose that skill if you can help it. Yeah, panini and pando. I've been seeing people calling it panda and pando, and it's like, yeah, I think we're all tired of its real word. And Tanner said, it's been lovely watching you paint the last hour, but Allie and I are passing out in our chairs. Our little family is off to bed. Oh, yeah, it's almost 10. Y'all have a good evening. Give Cinnamon and Ginger pets for me. You can give Cinna a hug. I think she'll tolerate it. Ginger, I don't know. Ginger's so sassy. I don't know if Ginger likes hugs or not. My little Ginger cat liked hugs, but only for a certain amount of time. And then it was, nope, done. All done. Put me down. But y'all have a good evening. Dawn said, totally understand you back. Depression is a butt kicker, but I learned to kick it back. Yes. I think of it, even though it's something I do struggle with sometimes more than others, I think of it like a parasite in my brain, and that it will lie to me and change. So when people are struggling with depression, life can look good on the outside to others, but the depression is lying to you and telling you that even though this is a beautiful, wholesome apple, that, oh no, but look, this apple has a worm, even if there isn't a worm in there. So I think of depression as a parasite that will do anything to keep me sick so that I can live. But we got to keep fighting it. And if you struggle with it, it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a weak person. It makes you an incredibly strong person, because that's a hard thing to deal with. Oh, and May being Mental Health Awareness Month, I appreciate you guys letting me talk about mental health and not trying to shame me out of it, or, you know, oh no, Becca, I don't feel that way, because, you know, this is something a lot of us deal with. Really like the Zoom classes. I feel like I would have done really well in them if I'd been better prepared. If I had better prepared myself to do schoolwork regularly. I feel like I'm wrapping up. Ginger loves hugs and Cinna runs from them. Oh, okay, well, tell them both they're very good girls. Oh, Ginger is such a cute floof. I mean, Cinna is too, but Ginger is like a fluffy version of Remy. I feel like I have so much respect for the kids who are having to do Zoom classes or having to do combination classes, because that would kick my ADHD booty growing up. Used to have, Kelly says, I used to have depression, but now I don't. I got out of it. That's good. My caution for you is that depression is one of those things that can sometimes come back. So if you feel like you are having a hard time, please don't hesitate to reach out to a doctor, to a professional for help, because sometimes you can get yourself out of it and sometimes you can't. So there's nothing wrong with talking to somebody who's trained to help you. Shaming people for talking about mental health is yep. Yeah, it is. It is very, it's just sad, and it's old thinking, like old-fashioned thinking. You know, it's struggling with mental health is not a lack of work ethic. It's not a lack of motivation in many instances. It's not a lack of wanting to do something. It's not a lack of character. It's an illness, and I will not say that people don't give people who have physical disabilities a hard time, because I know they do. But I think we should show people who are struggling with mental health illnesses compassion and love, and we should show people who are struggling with physical disabilities, whether we can see them or not, with compassion and love. So anyway, I had a really great time hanging out with y'all tonight. Depending on how next week goes, I would love to paint the wild rose with you guys. This has been, I think, I love hanging out with y'all. So, you know, I feel like many of these streams are like the best stream, but this was a really good stream. I really enjoyed this one. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I hope you guys have a safe and healthy week. If you are able to get the vaccine, please get the vaccine. If you are halfway done with the vaccine, please don't give up on it. Get the second dose. And I don't know about you guys, but even though I have gotten both of the vaccines, I'm going to continue to wear a mask because I like not being sick in the winter. That was really great. I did not get sick at all, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to continue wearing masks because I like not getting sick, and because I actually have a couple of family friends who are unable to get the vaccines because they have cerebral palsy, and there is legitimate concerns that it could cause seizures for them. So I want to protect them as well. All right, so I love you guys. I hope you guys have a great week, and hopefully I'll see you guys next week. Bye, y'all.